there everybody, it's Mark Crowley. I'm back with another How to Draw video. Today I'm going to be comparing all three of the main forms of perspective drawing: 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point perspective. And we're going to draw the exact same object using the three different systems so as to compare them. Now, I've drawn this object here, kind of a hollowed out cube, using what might be called a 0-point perspective, in the sense that none of these lines would ever recede to a single point. All of the lines that you see in this drawing basically are parallel to one another, and you will see this form of perspective in Japanese prints and so forth. In fact, I think what I'll do right now is splice in an old picture of a Japanese perspective print to show you how it uses a system a little bit like this one. So there you see it, and even today in logos and different situations, people will use this form of perspective. But what I want to do is show you how we would use the traditional 1-point perspective to begin with to draw this exact same object. So let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, so here's the version that we're going to do for the 1-point perspective. I've given myself a little head start by putting in just one side of the cube shape. And then this line back here is what we call the horizon line. And when you're doing 1-point or 2-point perspective, you definitely need that line in place to help you figure out where things are supposed to be. Now, I'm going to do like a classic 1-point perspective where we're really just looking straight at the side of the object, and it's receding in space directly away from our point of view. So I've put this one dot here, and that's going to be the point of 1-point perspective. And you can see me using that point to draw a diagonal line here and here, so as to create the upper edge, let's just say, the underside edge of this, the interior of the cube. And this line that I just drew, this horizontal one, is exactly parallel to all the other horizontal lines in the drawing. And that is one thing that makes 1-point perspective easier than the other ones, because you really are quite a substantial part of the drawing remains sort of vertical and horizontal. And so I've used that point there to add this extra vertical line for drawing the interior edge of that part of the cube, and then come over here and do the same. But before I can know where that line will end, I need to also complete, using that 1 point at the horizon line, to draw one more diagonal line, and then where these two naturally intersect, that tells me where the end of the square should be. Now, I don't say that you have to put the point directly behind the object as I did. You could put it here or here, but the farther you go in one direction or the other, the more unnatural the perspective becomes if you keep this indeed, perfectly horizontal vertical in terms of its line structure. So I'm taking that line, that point there, and finishing off that last part of the line. And that's really it for this one. We are looking straight into the interior of the cube. But to make it a little more three-dimensional looking, I'm going to go ahead and add some shading and also darken in the lines a bit. I'll do that all in time-lapse, and I'll be back to explain what I did. Alright, so there you go. That's the classic 1-point perspective version of the drawing, and I use this a lot for when I'm trying to draw like a corridor or a road or something where it's really going straight off into the distance, and you want to create that real sense of depth. But really it's only possible if you're going to keep this one side of the object just completely straight toward us with these 90-degree angles and so forth. We're going to move on now to drawing the same box in 2-point perspective, and you're going to see that I will choose to sort of turn it a little in space so as to show two different sides of the cube. Okay, so we're back with the same kind of a space with this horizon line in the same location. This time I'm going to put 1 point way over here and 1 point way over here. And this is going to allow us to do a 2-point perspective drawing of more or less that same object. I may change the shape just a little bit so as to demonstrate different aspects here. But I'm beginning with this point way over here on the left, and I'm going to be drawing the sort of lower edge and upper edge of one side of the object. And let's go ahead then and just jump in and draw the one side. And I'm going to go ahead and do perfectly, hopefully perfectly, vertical lines like so. And to ensure that they're parallel, I'm even going to use the ruler, to make the second line there. But that's not actually going to be my final line. I think I'm probably going to move it in a little. Let's go ahead and use these holes here to in the ruler to help me get a perfectly parallel vertical line there. And I'll go ahead and get rid of that first one. Be gone, annoying line. And that gives us one side. I'm going to go ahead and erase this horizon line here. We'll be erasing considerably more of it in just a moment, but I just wanted you to see what we established there as one side of the cube. Again, if we remember what type of an object we're drawing here, this sort of hollowed out cube. So let's go ahead and use this other point now, way over here, to draw a second line that is showing one more face of this object. And because I have put the 2 points, as far apart as I could within this drawing, but still relatively close to one another, we're going to get a pretty sharp angle there. Now again, I'm trying to make this perfectly parallel, so I'm coming over here to kind of remind myself of where the parallel line would fall. Let's go ahead and I guess I'll line these up against that, and this will become the far side of this cube. Maybe a little more like a rectangle the way I'm doing it. But you get the basic idea. Anyway, you see how these different lines here are relating to this other point. And so you've basically got two different faces to this cube, both of them receding in their own way toward a different point. And what I'm going to do right now, real quick in time lapse, is to get in those lines of the sort of hollowed out part of the cube. Okay, so you see that I've drawn this secondary square that kind of carves out the hollow section of the cube. And one thing to keep in mind is that this line also relates to this point, right? It's not parallel to that one. It's very slightly at a different diagonal angle. And the same holds for this line down here. It leads back to that point. Any line that you draw on this side is going to be heading back towards that. Any line that's on this face would head back towards that dot. Now, what becomes a little challenging, and I don't want to throw people off too much, is in deciding how to draw the interior, you almost have to sort of think about the construction of this cube. And I'm going to draw a couple of guidelines here just to help myself understand. This far point here would relate back to that line, right? I know it's a little bit, starts to get a little hairy here when you try to do a three-dimensional object like. With this point here is going to come back to that point in the distance, and that's how you figure out. I'm just going to go ahead and erase this. You can see how I used that to help me figure out where does this line go to create this. And I'll just quickly, to help you see it maybe a little better, I'm going to add a little shading here so you begin to see this as the underside of the interior of this cube. And having got that in place, you've figured out where that goes because it's always just going to be vertical, right? And then you draw one more line down here that relates back to that first point. Now this is a relatively simple object, right? This hollowed out cube. So you can imagine like drawing a staircase or anything that has lots and lots of different construction lines to it. Boy, it can quickly become quite challenging. But anyway, with practice, you can figure out these various systems of perspective and begun applying them to, of course, not merely a simple cube like this one, but to buildings and, like this, I think street corners. Very often we want to see both sides of the building, it's based on reality. If you stand at a street corner and take a photo of a building on the corner where you see both sides of it, it will tend to obey these laws of actual perspective. So again, in time-lapse, I'm going to finish this off with some darker lines and shading and so forth before we move on to the third and final form of perspective. All right, so there you see the finished drawing, the two-point perspective version. Maybe a little wider, the way I've drawn this, a bit more of a rectangular shape than a cube. But let's go ahead and compare between the two-point and the one-point perspective. Really quite drastically different when you put them side by side like that. But now it's time to move on to the hardest of them all, the three-point perspective. All right, so just to start with, I've pulled all the way back, and you can even see the legs of the tripod supporting my camera, which I normally don't like to be in frame, but I wanted you to see where these 3 points are, and I've put like a little pink marker on them to hopefully have them stand out a little more. This is the horizon line, as we saw with the two-point perspective and the one-point perspective, with the dots put about as far apart as you can get them, and then way down here at the bottom I've put this, what I call the sort of dot that's in the interior of the center of the Earth. It's below ground, really, and this is going to be a dot that you're going to hear me referring to as I begin working on my drawing of the cube. But let's go ahead and refocus the camera to get a little closer in on the details. All right, so at least we have these two dots still within frame, and you're just going to have to remember that way down here below the frame is that third dot. And I'm going to begin by drawing the upper surface of this cube. Now, what we tend to use three-point perspective for is an elevated point of view, or in some cases, a lower point of view looking up into the sky. I'm going to be doing this sort of elevated point of view, like we have risen up into the air to look down upon this cube. We just look down on this cube. We have no respect for it. I'm sorry, that's a dad joke par excellence. And so you see me drawing these diagonal lines that are relating to the two different points. These two heading off to that point way off on the right, and these two heading off to that one on the left. And this, if we erase away some of the excess lines, gives us the sort of, let's call it the roof of this cube, okay? And now we can take these points and using the dot that you can't see, but it is down here. Trust me, I am relating my ruler down toward that dot. Then you begin to add these perspective lines that would have been vertical lines in the two-point or one-point perspective version of the cube. But in this case, they become sort of tapering diagonal lines that are heading towards I sort of jokingly call it the point at the center of the Earth, but in a way that's kind of what it is. It's a point that goes deep down below the ground that you have illustrated, and those lines probably would converge at the center of the Earth. Anyway, it helps me remember what makes that lower point different from the others. And so here again, I'm going back to these left and right hand dots to do the lower surface of the cube. And that shows you a slightly skewed. I don't normally like to push it this far, but you have a kind of a fisheye lens, I suppose, type of feeling. If you haven't, oh, did you hear that pencil fall on the floor? It's all live, folks. It's all live and in the camera. So this gives you this sort of elevated point of view. Now, bear with me. I'm going to do in time-lapse what I did before, just sort of draw those interior lines so that we can begin working on that part of the drawing. All right, so there you see I did once again drawing this sort of interior square. In this case, every one of these lines, well, the vertical ones are relating to the point down in the center of the earth, whereas the horizontal ones, because it's cut out just on this side of the square, they're all leading back to that one on the right. And what you can do now is draw the interior of the square coming over like so. Now again, it can get a little confusing with where does this line stop, you know, in terms you almost have to sort of imagine, are we going to see enough of the other side of this thing that we would see the interior of it. And what I'm doing right now is sort of temporarily making the cube invisible so that I can have some sense of where would that line come down from. I don't think you would see it, right? I don't think you're going to see that. If we had made this a little more shallow, I think you might have seen it. So a little too late now for me to make that move, but you get the basic idea of how you would begin to do construction lines and so forth if you did indeed want to see the far edge of that line. And that basically gets us to the end of three-point perspective. Like I said, a great one for doing an elevated point of view, looking down at a building. A lot of times if you see Spider-Man flying above the skyscrapers, a lot of times they'll go for a three-point perspective in such an illustration. And of course they're drawing not just one cube, but just loads of buildings. And you see the rooftops, and you see the different sides and the windows all receding off into the distance. So let me go ahead and do one last time. I'm going to darken this up, add some shading, and we'll be back with a few final words. All right, well, there you see the finished illustration in three-point perspective. Interestingly, when you do it this way, the shadows, the drop shadows, also relate to those points on the horizon. Knowing your perspective can help you not only with the construction of the object, but with having the shadows, the drop shadows, be cast in an authentic way. But let's go ahead and compare the difference between three-point perspective and two-point perspective. And as we began with one-point perspective, really interesting to see how the same object, or a very similar object anyway, comes across as quite different depending on which style of perspective that you choose. But I always like to end my videos by saying thank you to anyone who chooses to support me by getting any of my books, such as The Drawing Lesson, my graphic novel that teaches you how to draw, The Two-Pencil Method, my very latest book featuring Joy, our corgi, right there on the cover, and Mastering Manga, a book that really does contain quite a lot about all three of these different forms of perspective. So I really can't say thank you enough to those of you who help me out by picking up any of those books. But before I lay down my pencil, which I always like to do at the end of the video, I do want to point out that I've got lots of other videos that cover perspective. I've put them into a playlist, and I will have a link in the description if you want to learn more and more about perspective drawing. But for now, let's go ahead and lay down this pencil. In fact, let's have this pencil relate to that far distant line. I'm laying down the pencil in perspective. Not sure if that works, but anyway, it is far and away time to end this video. I want to thank you all for watching it. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another one real soon.